I'm Spencer Ehrenfeld, and with me, as always, is our co-host and our executive producer, Nori Ehrenfeld. Hey, Nori.
Hi, everybody. Welcome.
Tikanis, I should say, Nori, because where are you in the world right now?
Right now, I am in Greece. Beautiful Greece.
I hope you're enjoying your spanakopita and your feta cheese. Is everything going well?
It's all magnificent. Beautiful country.
What's interesting, Nori, is your background looks very similar to your dorm room at Florida Gulf Coast University, so we're a little bit confused.
I had to keep it consistent for the fans, you know.
Okay, great. Well, this must be a super important guest that we have today because we haven't done a podcast in a while, Nora. You've been in semi-retirement from your podcasting role, and you are podcasting live from Greece. So tell us a little bit about our very special guest today and why it was so important for us to do this today.
Well, today our guest is someone that when he reached out to us, was really interested in having a conversation with, because he's not, most of the guests we've had, if not all of them, are all adults. And Tom, our guest, he goes by Tom Oliver, is only 20 years old. And he's made quite an impression on me because he is an autism advocate, and he believes in spreading awareness for autism and teaching people about the condition and what it's like to live with it, because he himself has it. And particularly what's relevant for Tom being on this particular podcast is because Tom specifically is trying to become a lawyer himself, with aspirations and ambitions of studying at Harvard Law, and his goal in life is to fight for people with autism who are stuck in the justice system in any sort of capacity. Well, and so I go ahead.
I was gonna say, that's fantastic, Nori, and I'm so glad that you and Tom connected. And Tom Oliver, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Well, and so where in the world are you?
Kind introduction.
Where are you, Tom?
So I'm in Western Australia at the moment.
Wow. So not only our youngest podcast guest, but also our first Australian guest, and very excited to have you here, Tom. Tell us a little bit about your background and your interest in autism and advocating for people. Is this the correct way to describe someone who has autism? Autistic?
Yes, okay. That's correct. And you have to excuse my Australian accent as well, Spencer and Nori.
Excuse it, we love it.
Okay.
It's fantastic.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Yeah, so I was diagnosed with autism, as Nori said, about 5 years ago when I was 15. And yeah, it's something I'm very passionate about. When I was first diagnosed with autism, I was very confused. I felt like when I was first told I had this disability imposed upon me. And yeah, I started researching what autism is, what it's about, what it means. And I found myself with this clarity. I sort of was able to understand myself, why I'd always struggled to decode sarcasm, struggled understanding certain social cues, why I was able to hyper-focus on a singular task for hours on end without flinching, why I was very obsessive, why I got very interested in things. And yeah, I've always loved rules, love adhering to rules, but also love finding loopholes around rules. And so I became interested in law. And so I'm studying law and biomedical science at university. And as Nori said, I'm looking to establish my own law firm, defending people with disabilities and autism alike, and really fighting for a justice system which caters for all.
Well, what a wonderful aspiration. For those of our listeners or watchers, if they're watching this on YouTube, don't know what autism is, could you explain it to us?
Yeah, so autism is a spectrum disorder. And so you can have highly functioning individuals, as it were, or low functioning individuals, as it were. It ranges from people with high social skills to low social skills, people who are non-verbal, in fact, people who are verbal. You really, if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism, as the saying goes. And so, yeah, I found when I was researching this area, and I've delivered a TED talk on this area, and I found that autistic people were very vulnerable in our justice system. And studies show that because essentially 2% of the population has autism, and studies show that 4.4% of individuals in prison have autism. And so there's a 2 times greater proportion there in prison compared to that of the general population. And so it's why I'm really passionate about this. And yeah.
So,
Well, Tom,
go
as
ahead, Nori.
as you might know, we had Kate Moss as one of our guests earlier, and I believe last season, who was a lawyer herself and an accomplished lawyer, I believe, who also was diagnosed with autism, I believe, at a young age. And what I thought was really interesting about our conversation with her was her experience and her perception of the difficulties that autistic people face specifically within the legal system and the justice system. So I want to know, from I know you're not a lawyer yet, but from your various studies and research, what you've seen to be the biggest challenges for people with autism in the justice system.
Is it Haley Moss?
Haley
Yeah.
Kate Moss?
Oh, did I?
Haley
It's
Moss.
Haley Moss, not
Kate
Kate
Moss
Moss.
is the
Sorry.
super boss, Nori.
Oh,
Focus,
the name
Nori, focus.
Moss.
Yes,
Haley Moss
Sorry.
is a good friend of mine.
Oh,
That's
great.
right. No, good friend of mine, and I've had a few Zoom meetings with her, albeit she's in the US. So yeah, the great question. So essentially, through an analysis of case law, I found there were 3 distinct categories of autistic characteristics which render them extremely vulnerable, and they were number 1, an inability to read and respond to social cues. So that can be anything from not understanding what a police officer is telling them to do or say, can be misunderstanding a question in a police interview, where misunderstanding leads to misinterpretation. Really non-exhaustive. They can get involved in the wrong crowd. And number 2 is hypersensitivities. So that can be hypersensitivities to touch, sound, smells, and the like. And also hypersensitivities to deviations or interferences with their structure and routine. See a lot of autistic individuals who something really quite subtle can really set them off, and then they're imprisoned and punished harshly through a lack of knowledge of where they're coming from. And number 3 was obsessive interests. And so this can be, an obsession with trains or an obsession with certain interests which renders them more susceptible to committing crimes. There was a case actually from the US wherein an autistic man named Darius was obsessed with trains, and Darius was taught, he's an autistic man by the way, and he was taught to drive and operate trains and buses as a child by employees of a train station. And as an adult, Darius decided to just get in a train and operate it, getting his passengers from A to B, all in perfect timing, all passengers being satisfied with the service. However, ultimately, Darius wasn't employed to operate this train. And so he was charged with impersonating a federal employee. He was imprisoned. And upon his release, imprisonment hadn't changed Darius as a person. Darius is an autistic man who's obsessed with trains. And so he was again found driving these trains. He was again imprisoned, again released, and the cycle just continued. And Darius has now spent most of his adult life incarcerated and, segregated from society. And so, yeah, what I advocate for is, employing people like Darius. And I also advocate for therapy and tailored non-custodial sentences over imprisonment.
So
That's fascinating.
Do you think that his autism should be, and I don't want to use the word excuse, but should excuse him from having committed a crime?
I mean, certainly it is a case-by-case basis, and it certainly does act in mitigation. And I'll say that essentially I worked on a case recently with my mentor. I'm working as a consultant at a criminal defense firm because I'm technically not a lawyer yet. And I work for a guy who grew up in South Sudan in a refugee camp, and he learned to study law in war-ravaged South Sudan under this refugee camp. And anyway, he's my mentor, and we defended an autistic guy recently, and he was facing many years of imprisonment, and we set a precedent in Australia, getting him off on a non-custodial sentences with suitable therapy. And that was unheard of here in Australia, at least, because judges, they don't really necessarily have to have regard to the subtle characteristics that are within autism. And so to answer your question, Spencer, I would say, whilst autism isn't an excuse for everything, I would say that if the autistic characteristics are the underlying cause for the crimes, then by sentencing people like Darius to imprisonment, you've got to question, are we punishing Darius for driving the train, or are we punishing him for having autism, for a characteristic which he was born with? And if so, is suitable therapy more imprisonment? And I put it to you that it would be.
Wow. So Tom, how does one go about being diagnosed? Because I know a lot of people, even on this very podcast, that have some of the characteristics, including myself, that you just described. How do we know whether or not we're autistic?
Yeah, so there's the DSM-5 here in Australia, at least, and it's the diagnostic criterion. And I believe I'm probably not the best person to answer this question, because I'm studying to be a lawyer, but essentially you need a number of characteristics in a number of categories, and the process is very expensive. We do need a larger screening process for people prior to entering imprisonment, so that we can, support those individuals, because it is a very stressful time, and imprisonment is not conducive for success for autistic people. They're very vulnerable in there, and it's really not the place for them to be.
It seems to me that it would be ideal if you could prophylactically test people to determine if they're autistic before they find themselves entwined in the criminal process. Is there anything that's available out there? And I know you're in Australia, we're here in the States, and he's in Greece, but is there anything out there that is available that help people screen themselves?
Yeah, and look, to be honest with you, Spencer, I think the premise of that question really illuminates the lack of knowledge, the lack of information out there. There's not really much I can say other than I will say that when I was researching to deliver my TED Talk, I thought to myself, I'll search for criminal defense lawyers specializing in autistic clients and try and obtain answers, learn what's happening in the field. And I'm based here in Western Australia, and I couldn't find a single lawyer specializing in autistic clients here in Western Australia. And so I broadened my search Australia-wide. The entire nation still, I only found one South Australian lawyer, and she works for the South Australian government, and she's near retirement. And there are a few over in the US. I know Carol Weinman, and I know one or two in the UK, but really there's a lack of lawyers who can defend these individuals. And obviously we live in a jurisdictional legal system. And so if I commit an offence here in Western Australia, I can't seek counsel over in South Australia if they have a deeper understanding and are more well-equipped. And so certainly more resources are needed in this area.
So Tom, go ahead, Nori.
I first of all just want to applaud you. As someone near your age, I think you're an incredible kid, and truly exceptional. And I would be surprised if Harvard doesn't give you a full ride. And secondly, I just want to know, because hearing all these things, I think one of the most important pillars that is involved in this kind of plight for autistic awareness in the justice system is empathy, and of course the lack thereof, and partly because people don't know so much about autism around the world. And so I just want to know how and in what ways you can help, and what your goals would be as an attorney representing autistic clients or people with disabilities in general, how and in what ways you can improve their situation and potentially, which I'm sure you will do one day, improve the global consensus on autism?
Yeah, great question. That's a major question. Thank you for asking it. So yeah, I've had a few meetings with stakeholders from Harvard and also Yale, and I'd love to work with some of the brightest legal minds in the world to really counteract this injustice. And obviously, I want to set up my own law firm defending these individuals, and hopefully, build it into an empire. Really reach as many individuals as we can. I do think that we really need to fund a lot of research into this area, specifically into autistic people's experience in the justice system. This research needs to be conducted through surveys with a sufficient number of respondents, as studies differ greatly between legal jurisdictions, is what we've found. I think we can undertake more qualitative research by interviewing and listening to the stories of autistic people who have already been through the justice system. And as I said, that screening process of an autism diagnosis, I think that's really vital, because ultimately we can't support individuals if we don't know that they need that support. And I guess my main message and something, if to the listeners out there, if they're going to take one thing away, let it be this: we really need to rethink the way we punish autistic people. I believe that in most cases, therapy is more suitable. Studies actually show that autistic people do not respond effectively or even adequately to mainstream correctional settings. Autistic people do not throw in prison. And there is a critical need for better understanding of autism just generally in the community, particularly among lawyers, police officers and judges and so forth. Albeit I firmly believe that, you do not have to work in the legal sector, nor even be a jury member to make a difference. The judiciary system to judge transcends the courtroom. I think teachers can employ greater understanding when interacting with or delivering punishment upon an autistic child behaving badly in classrooms. Public servants can demonstrate more empathy. Doctors and nurses can demonstrate more empathy. I really think that this isn't an issue which is endemic to the legal profession. Yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Oh, beautifully.
Yeah. So it's a fascinating area of the world and of life and of the law. And Tom, I got to tell you, it was just truly an honor to have met you. And Nori, thank you so much for introducing us and our listeners to Tom Oliver. Tom, if people are interested in following up with you or learning more about autism, what resource would you direct them to?
Yes, so my TED Talk, which is soon to be released, so I can't really give. My website is tomoliver.biz, and you can find me on LinkedIn as well.
Great, and we'll put those links on the
bottom. I'll put your links. Yeah.
All right.
Awesome.
Well, thank you very much, Tom Oliver, and thank you, Nori, so much for doing this very important podcast. It was a very good episode. Thank you, Nori.
Absolutely.
Thank you for having me.
Now, if you're interested in being on the Trust Me, I'm a Lawyer podcast, Nori, what's the best way for people to reach you in Greece?
Well, the best way is always to direct message us through Instagram. And our Instagram is Trust Me, I'm a Lawyer podcast. And of course, you can email us at trustmeimalawyerpodcast@gmail.com as well. And that's the best way for sure.
Awesome. Thank you very much, everybody. And we'll see you on the next podcast.